Hello everyone, welcome to the first video for chapter 20. This video we're going to be talking about revolutions in Latin America and Europe, as we're moving into the middle 1800s. There was a fair amount of upheaval on the European continent. You didn't have a lot of the big international wars during this time period from like the 1830s to the 1840s and 50s, but you still had a fair amount of domestic turmoil. You had people looking for political change, and a lot of this was based around different ideologies, right? And that brings us to the first section, an age of ideologies. Now, an ideology is a system of thought and belief. Ideologies can take a variety of form. They can be your personal views on how you live your life. They can be views on how society should be run, and most commonly, views on government and politics. The mid-1800s in Europe saw the development of clearly defined ideologies that would lead to a great deal of political upheaval. Let's first look at a comparison of two major ideologies, conservatives versus liberals. Now, we still use these terms a lot in discussing politics, but let's go over the basics. Conservative, right? This is an ideology that wants to preserve the way things are, usually in relation to politics and society. This became the standard ideology after the Congress of Vienna. Remember, the Congress of Vienna was a meeting of the leaders of Europe after the Napoleonic Wars, and they established conservative governments. It means to protect from harm, the word conserve, but it can also mean to protect from change. Right? They wanted to go back. They wanted to bring things back to the way they were. They often looked to changes in the world as being harmful. And by the standards of 1800s Europe, conservatives wanted to preserve monarchies. Now, monarchies, we're talking about kings, queens, right? The crown. The old order of the king being, established by divine right and bestowing laws against everyone, like you see up in the picture. But we're talking about the power of the crown, right? That's the big thing here. And they were the tried and true system of government since ancient times. And to conservatives, they provided stability. They provided a sense of order. It's what people knew. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have liberals. Now, liberal means open to new behavior and experiences. So in terms of government, they were much more open to reforms or changes. Really, that's really just what reforms mean, is changes. Especially changes that would make governments more democratic. They supported reforms like universal manhood suffrage, right? The ability for all men, regardless of their social class, to vote. And they opposed absolute monarchies. They wanted more republic type governments. They also were in favor of laissez-faire economics, which is actually in contrast to what a lot of modern day liberals typically support. Remember, laissez-faire economics means the government is hands off. That today is typically something that is favored by conservatives. So it's kind of interesting how liberal views have changed over the centuries, right? But in the 1800s, they definitely were supporters of laissez-faire economics, that the government does not get involved in the economy. All right, so the only other thing really that we need to go over in this section is the impact that nationalism is having throughout Europe. Now, we already know that nationalism is pride in your country, but it can also mean a belief that your nationality or ethnic group should have independence from a dominant group. Now, Europe at this time had several what we call multi-ethnic empires. Let's look on the map here. Russia, even though you can't tell from this, was a multi-ethnic empire. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. Obviously, the Russians were the big part, but you got parts of Poland in there. You've got these Baltic countries up in here, like what today would be Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. You've got Ukraine down in here, and then you got your Stan countries in the middle. You've got Austria-Hungary, which today would be not only Austria and Hungary, but the Czech Republic and Romania. And then you got this big one down here, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was centered around this here, which today is Turkey. And it was an Islamic empire, right? It was the last of those Islamic empires going back to the Middle Ages. But you also notice how it included big sections in the Middle East. Let me move me out of the way here so you can see the full map. And down into Egypt, as well as this peninsula right here, which is Greece. All right. Now, these multi-ethnic empires, they were very diverse peoples. They had different languages. They had different religions. And a lot of them were looking for independence movements, right? Nationalism gives them a sense of identity and unity, but it was also going to lead to problems down the road for the people in charge of these. Greece is an example. In 1821, Greece, again, right here, rebelled against the Ottoman Turks. Remember, we said this today is called Turkey. So the Ottomans were known as Turks. They were Turkish people. Well, the Greeks, looking at themselves as being the founders of Western civilization and so forth, they didn't like being ruled by the outsiders. Let me just make sure you get the C in there. And so in 1821, they staged a pretty massive uprising. Erase everything here. Here you see the Greeks in their traditional garb fighting against the Turks. You can tell by the turbans and so forth on their head. And they were successful. By 1830, Greece had established its independence. So the reason I bring this up is it's just an example of how nationalist independence movements could be problematic for these larger empires. That trend would continue well into the 1800s, and not only in multi-ethnic areas, but also in some established European countries that had to deal with still some of that leftover spirit of the French Revolution. All right, and we'll get into that with the next video.